Hello, everyone. Welcome to my 1cc commentary guide and how to play for Esprade. I am playing the PS4 version. Not so long ago, about a weekend ago, I ended up streaming this game for 20 hours over the course of 3 days. It was one hell of a grind and a much more stubborn clear than I was expecting. So, in this video, I'm not only going to be doing my usual commentary stuff, but I'm going to try my best to explain the tactics and strategy I use to get a 1cc. So, hopefully, you can get your own. So when I first began, I went back and forth as to what character I wanted to play for the clear. I began by playing JB 5th, that's the character with the headband and the purple shot. The reason why I picked him at first is because he has a nice wide shot and pretty solid movement speed and everything. And so I thought, in the usual cave fashion, the character with the wide shot tends to be the one that's easier to get the 1cc with because they have better screen control, they can keep the stages a little bit more tame. The issue, though, was that in Esprade, I found that a lot of the difficulty did not lie in the stages, which is pretty unusual for cave games. Instead, I felt like the majority of the difficulty lied with the boss fights, and so the reason that JB 5th ultimately became a real struggle for me, even though I came close a time or two, was that he takes much longer to kill the bosses, and his concentrated movement speed is fairly turtleish. And so moving through the patterns not only was harder in itself, but also the fact that the patterns went on longer ended up making him a real tricky character to use to get the 1 credit clear. I still think it is doable, of course, but I ended up playing Yusuke, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, and I think that he ended up being the better character to get the 1cc with for a number of reasons. The first is that he has a pretty powerful attack and just damage output, and so he gets through the boss fights much faster just on a pure damage level. Another thing that's really good about him is that his concentrated movement speed is significantly faster than JB 5th's, and so he also is able to maneuver through the patterns while concentrated much more easily, which is pretty dang important, as I'll explain later. And then the other fact is that he has some ways he can kind of work around his narrow shot, and also the design of the game sort of favors his design, which is a little bit unusual for cave games. So usually the way it works is when you have the faster, high damage, narrow shot type ships in cave, something like AL in Donanpachi, they tend to be the more easy to master but difficult to learn right away type of ship, where once you have your routes down and everything, those ships can be very powerful and can really chew their way through the game. But until you really learn the stages and the routes and the boss fights, they tend to be a little bit harder to use than the wide shot ships like JB 5th. However, in Esprade, the reason why that's not quite the case is that a lot of the enemies in this game take a significant amount of damage to kill, unlike other cave games, and there's also less enemies. So you kind of get into a situation where having higher damage output is not only beneficial on the boss fights, but it's also beneficial during the stages themselves in many cases as well. Another thing that's unique about this game that makes Yusuke another great pick is that there is the special shot. I can't remember what the term for it is, like power shot or whatever, but it's the secondary shot you have in this game that's really unique compared to other cave games that don't tend to have that. So this is a 4-button game, at least the way I play it, where I have the shot, and then I dedicate a rapid shot button, and then I have the bomb button. But then there's also the special shot button. So now you got 4 rather than 3. And the way I play it is that while I'm in the stages, I end up mostly using rapid shot, as you can see here. And then what's cool about this character is that if you let your meter charge up, your special shot meter, you can see that down in the corner. It's currently at 15. And then when I shoot it, it'll go down to 0 like that. So the thing is, what you do is you fly around, use your high movement speed with rapid shot to take out the larger enemies. And then when you have popcorn and stuff spawning on the sides, you turn left or right and you shoot your special shot, and you'll kind of sweep it across the screen, as you'll see me do here and here. And that's a really, really useful technique to gain a lot of screen control that normally you can't pull off with the narrow shot ship. So that's another technique that I recommend doing is basically you fly around, you use your concentrated shot, and you use a rapid shot on the big enemies like you see here. Then when you have little ones spawning to the side of you, you fling your special shot onto them and take them out so that you cover your flanks. Another important mechanic that I want to talk about that's a little less obvious is the hitbox in this game, because this game has a very bizarre, strange hitbox design and behavior, even for cave games. So the way it works is, as you can see here, the first thing I recommend you do is you turn on your hitbox display. That's in the options menu. Unfortunately, this is in Japanese, so I actually cannot remember which option it is. But what I ended up doing is I got Google Translate on my phone, and I held up my phone to the screen, and I sort of just navigated through the options until I saw something that resembled hitbox display on, and then turn that on. Make sure you don't turn off your input lag reduction though, so be really careful what settings you mess around with. Make sure you're changing the right one. But you'll know because the hitbox displays itself. The thing about this hitbox that's really bizarre, and I think is honestly just a flaw of the game, is the way it moves around. So typically in bullet hell and just shmups in general, the way it works is when you move around, you know, your character sprite will move, your location on the screen will move, but your hitbox will remain nice and steady in the center of your character, right? Well, in Esprade, Cave, for whatever reason, decided, no, we're not going to do that. Maybe it was a mistake, I think, honestly. So the way your hitbox works in this game is when you move, you can see right here, when I'm flying around, when you move left, your hitbox kind of moves to the right. And when you move right, your hitbox drifts to the left. And so normally when you're trying to weave your way around these tight patterns and that sort of thing, you will have no problems in something like Ketsui. But in this game, you run into problems because you will maneuver your hitbox into enemies and stuff. And it feels like it's really cheap and you'll die and wonder what the hell happened. That's what happened. However, I do have a bit of advice that's going to be very useful to you. And I didn't actually know this until the PS4 port introduced this hitbox display. So shout outs to the PS4 port. So what you do is if you hold down your concentrated shot, you can hold down your rapid shot as well, it doesn't matter, and your special shot, you'll go into this animation you'll see me doing here, where you're going concentrated, but then your character automatically peppers in these little special shots. For a long time, I thought, oh, this probably isn't that good of a thing to do, because it's probably better to charge up your special shots. And when you're in the stages, that's normally the case. However, on boss fights or on stages or on sections where you need to maneuver and micro around bullets, that is definitely not the case. You want to do this kind of strange animation, and the reason why, as you can see here, he's kind of like holding himself out and he holds his arm out. For whatever reason, this stabilizes your hitbox. So watch my hitbox. Notice how it's staying centered. If you're in this animation, your hitbox will behave itself and hold still. So that's why in boss fights and like tight sections we need to dodge, I always recommend you start doing this, so that your hitbox will behave itself and you can actually dodge around bullets. So that's a technique that's, I think, very hidden but also incredibly important. Another bit of advice that I want to give before we get too far in the game is the stage order selection, because the order in which you play the stages, I think, does matter as far as getting the survival. So the stage order I play with Yusuke is the school first, and then you play the mall with the tank and everything, and then end on the bay. I think that's a great way to go, because if you have the school last, I don't think you can have the school last with Yusuke, to be honest, but with the other characters still. If you have the school last, you have to fight that boss in the third version, and it's absolutely a pain in the butt. He'll start spawning clones. He has 5 health bars. It's just ridiculous. And then the tank in the third one is pretty aggressive. I think the Bay helicopter is the easiest boss, so that's why I always choose it third. And you also can kind of cheese it with a charge shot here, which I'm going to show you. So the way you change the orders of the game is another hidden mechanic, is that what button you press ends up influencing the stage order when you select your character. So when you go to select your character, and if you press, the regular shot button, you get the default stage order. Then if you press barrier, you get a different stage order, and if you press special shot, you get a different stage order. Unfortunately, I cannot remember which button gets you school, mall, bay, but I think it is the barrier button. Try that. If it's not, then it's the special shot. It's one or the other. I know it's not the default. But yeah, you want to get this stage order, I think. It's the easiest. So here we go, the subway. This is the make or break stage. There's a very important section coming up that I want to point out to you, the hidden extend. Getting this is absolutely vital. So here it comes. The way you get it is you listen for that sound effect here. You see this subway on the right, and then right at the end is the hidden extend, as you saw there. So the way you get it is you want to sort of take things out on the left, then you'll hear the sound effect for that subway train on the right, but don't immediately move into it because it's meant to trap there. There's a certain sort of rhythm you have to learn, or timing you have to learn, where you hang out on the left just long enough to go up and around and then land yourself on the end of that just before it, gets off screen so you can pick up the life up like I did there. I definitely recommend when you're practicing this game, you make a save state right before that section and just hammer and hammer and hammer it over and over and over till you get it 100% consistent, because that is incredibly essential to getting the clear, in my opinion, because resources are pretty precious in this game. You do get a fair amount of them, but the game is also fairly brutal, so getting that extend is very important. And of course, if you die getting the extend and then you end up not grabbing it because you're in your death animation, happened to me many times, just reset, because that's a 2 life swing and you're in for a hell of a time. I think the subway stage is basically the make or break stage for the run, where if you do well in the stage, your run's alive. If you do poorly, you're going to reset here. This is where you're going to do a lot of your resets. Another bit of advice I have that I need to talk about is the barrier system of the game and how this works. So unlike other cave games where you have sort of a default bombing system, Ketsui do Donpachi, the way this game works is that you have a meter and you have a barrier. And what you do is you can choose how you want to use the barrier and how long you want to activate it. The longer you charge it, the higher the damage output, but the more meter burn. The less you charge it, the less meter burn, but you do no damage basically, and it's basically just clear the screen of bullets. So for the most part, you have to have this sort of routing in mind. As you saw in that base stage on the helicopter, at times you want to just charge it up really, really nicely and blast the bosses with it if you're going for damage. If you're going through sections where you wanted just a little bit of wiggle room, or you want to just do a bunch of screen cancels, then you want to do a bunch of small barriers. Typically the way it goes though is in boss fights, you charge them and blast the bosses with them to skip and do damage, because it does a ton of damage. And then in the stages, you typically just want to use little barriers. That's kind of the general rule of thumb here. And as you'll see, so I'm making this way around, because I found even it's not really all that worth it to do like 2 little ones when you can just do one big one that does like way more damage and is way more efficient. So as you'll see here, I'm trying to get around this pattern. This pattern is both fun and awful, depending on what it does. You can sort of manipulate how it spawns on your position, but the problem with that pattern, and the problem with a lot of patterns in Esprade that's pretty unique to this game compared to the other cave games, is this game really has some issues with monitoring its slowdown and its slowdown behavior, where it's like hibachi syndrome throughout the entire game, where within patterns the game will slow down and speed up, slow down and speed up, and you just have to learn when that happens. I wish there was a better way to get around it, but there isn't. That's why save states and just grinding out fights is really important, because like that pattern I was talking about before, where there's all those sort of like lines and it made this cute little maze. The way that pattern works is you're going through it, you're like, yeah, it's nice and slow at the start, and then about halfway through the pattern it just randomly speeds up. And so you always have to position yourself and be prepared for that speed up, or just charge up a bomb if you don't want to deal with it. So now we're going into stage 5. This stage is all about the cancels. It's kind of like a Mushi stage in a way. The problem is that unlike other cave games, like I was mentioning before, these enemies have an insane amount of health. And so where you normally get the cancel in, Mushihime-sama or Futari, you're going to be hanging around in front of the enemies much longer to get the cancels, because they have a lot of health. And remember that Yusuke does the most damage of the characters, so if he's having a hard time, the other ones are as well. So the way I deal with this stage is you do have to do a lot of save state practice. You have to route it out. Try your best to minimize your bomb usage, because you're going to want to use those bombs on the boss, unfortunately. And another mechanic that I want to explain before we get to the end here that's really important is how your bomb recharge works. So obviously if you die, you recharge your bombs. That's not all that complicated. But let's say you're within a life or between lives. The way it works is you can see the blocks up there on the top left, right? Your block counter. Whenever that reaches a certain number, and it kind of depends on your life, and I don't fully understand how it works, but I know the first time it's 300, and then I think after that it's 400, something like that. But the way it works is once you've used the bomb like I did there, now whenever this meter, the chip counter up there, reaches a certain number, in this case it'll be 400, instead of dropping chips, it'll now start dropping those energy recharge items that you noticed before. So the idea of this is that you want to sort of route it out to where you're using bombs to where it's smart, but you're also lining it up so where you can find some nice and easy recharges or recharges at the right times. And so bomb routing in this game for survival is incredibly important and incredibly useful because of that. And as you'll see here, I'll probably use a bomb to get out of that, yeah. But I really wish I had more meter there and I could just recharge my bombs, but no, I didn't have enough chips. So I'm gonna have to try my best to get through this fight and then recharge chips on the little Alice clones. That's the plan anyway. So this boss fight is really ridiculous, I'm not gonna lie, but it is pretty fun to play once you kind of get an idea for how it works. It's just unfun because it's at the end there and you're gonna have to go through a bunch of bosses, and this is where the game gets hard. Basically the game is hard and challenging throughout, but this is where the real difficulty spike kicks in, is this fight right here, I think. Or I guess stage 5 in general, depending on how comfortable you are with the stage. But the way it works is, as you can see here, you want to be spinning around him, and you kind of just misdirect him and macro around him by spinning around him. There are times where you'll need to start changing directions. One nice thing about Yusuke is that he has really fast movement speed, and so he gets around this guy much easier than the other characters do. Another important point about this fight here is that your bombs do a lot of damage on that guy, much more than the other bosses. So basically, if you can sort of get him down to halfway health, just fighting him straight up, at the end there, when it starts to get more chaotic and wild, I recommend just charging a bomb and taking him out. So here we go, the Alice clone section, I think a pretty infamous section in this game. I think it's really not all that hard, to be honest, but I also play Dodonpachi, which has a similar section that I call the Hall of Hell. This is like a baby version of that. It isn't as bad. But the way you do it is you move around in these sort of C-shaped patterns, kind of typical bullet hell stuff. But you want to make sure you're getting the timing correct. So the way the timing works is if you're moving too quickly, you'll just run into the bullets, or you'll kind of just run into a wall. If you're moving too slowly, you'll end up pinned in the corner. So what you want to do is this nice rhythm where you go up, you misdirect, you move down, and there's a very particular rhythm that you have to do it at to get nice openings. Then here we come into the last bit here with the jumping Alices. The thing about this section that's important is you want to delay moving forward, because the jumping Alices will actually jump into you, and that can kill you. In my experience, it killed me way more often than the actual bullets did. So you have to watch out for those jumping Alices. So unfortunately, see, if I could get 400, I would have got the bomb recharge, and that would have been beautiful. But I was at 355. It wasn't quite enough, unfortunately, and I just hit some button here. Sorry, accidentally moved forward in the replay. That's okay. So here we go into this first pattern here. Unfortunately, I don't have any bombs. The way you work around it is you want to move alongside these red bullets within the lanes of the purple bullets. It's actually really difficult, not because it's a pattern to get around, but because your hitbox is so awkward and stupid. That's why these patterns are hard in Esprade. If you were playing these patterns in a Dodonpachi or a Ketsui, they wouldn't be all that threatening. But your hitbox in this game just has a life of its own. It's also got, feels like it's the size of a barn too. It just gets clipped a lot. And so you have to actually be incredibly precise moving through that pattern. And what I recommend doing is moving alongside, and then if you die, just bomb it. Don't get cute with it. So this pattern here, this is the naughty little pattern where if you have the resources, just bomb your way through it. That's my opinion, because this pattern is incredibly chaotic and it will clip you, because what she'll do is she'll throw these kind of sidewinder bullet walls that don't seem all that hard to dodge. They really don't. But they have a real habit of clipping you, and you have to be so precise, and then they also move at weird speeds, and their hitboxes are deceivingly big. So I always say just bomb that pattern if you can. Unfortunately, I took a hit there. Usually I can get through this pattern unscathed. The problem with this pattern here is that slow down speed up syndrome, where when those red lines are on the screen, the red rays, the bullet patterns will slow down. But as soon as they leave the screen, it'll speed back up. So you get this start, like hot and cold, red light, green light effect on that pattern. It's absolutely ridiculous. The way to get through it is to just learn to predict the slowdowns and speed ups, which is very counterintuitive, but that's how you have to do it. Made it through that pattern okay-ish. I can no-miss this pattern, but unfortunately, the pressure was getting to me, and I bombed too early. So unfortunately, I bombed way too early. I was supposed to save the bomb for right now, but I bombed way too early because I got scared. And so now I have to pull off a Christmas miracle and get through. I not only have to get through this pattern without using too many resources, but then I got to fight the next pattern with basically a very small selection of resources to go. And this is one of the hardest patterns in the game. Luckily, I didn't use that much on that barrier, so I do have something to work with. Let me talk about the strategy on this last pattern here because it's pretty wild. The idea is you want to get up above her and then predict how she's going to attack you. So the purple bullets are always fixed and they're always shooting downward. So the purple bullets aren't really all that much of an issue, except that they can linger on the screen when you're trying to dodge the blue bullets. That's the real problem, like they did right there. So the blue bullets are or the blue hands are what you want to watch out for, and those are aimed. So what you do is you're kind of flying up above her, and you're trying to maneuver her around the screen, and then hit her with special shots here and there. The issue is that her movement is pretty random. I feel like you can kind of coax her to certain points on the screen, but as far as which direction she's gonna move, you don't know. And a big danger of this fight isn't just getting hit by the hands, but having her just ram into you, because you want to be fairly close to her so you can misdirect her shots. It's a real high wire act there. I managed to clutch that out. That was way more clutch than it seemed, because that pattern is pretty chaotic and scary. And before, I was getting absolutely whopped by it. But luckily, I was able to pull it out. I had about 5 runs end on that pattern before. And so I wasn't all that hopeful going into it, and I was getting real frustrated. But luckily, thank Akeda, I got the clear. I was able to clutch it out. So let me end by thanking my patrons. So thank you to Adam Pearson, Adrian Reyes, Dingo, Handicapped, Anthony A, Ben Wynn, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Corio, Disco Stas, Leia, Dominic NG, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Shmupper, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Joe Angelo, Gameboy Guru, K, Malays, Mark Toms, Maz, Meher Calendrian, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, 9, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Ram Q, Raul, Real Skeen, Sketchy Raccoon, Smacky Factor, TRM, Sugumo, Plasmo, Yishi, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching, everyone.